There is a specific kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace. It's a moment many of us carry, stored in the back of our minds like a faded photograph we never asked to keep. It isn't loud. It isn't a moment of trauma that makes the evening news. There is no shouting, no slamming doors, no dramatic exits. It's just quiet. Imagine you're standing in a living room. Maybe you're 10 years old, maybe 16, or perhaps you're 35, visiting your parents for the holidays. Across the room, someone else is the center of gravity. A sibling is being praised for a promotion, a cousin is being toasted for an engagement, or perhaps a younger brother is simply being seen for a small effort he made. You are standing right there. You've worked hard too. You've stayed out of trouble. You've been the stable one. And then the realization hits you like a cold draft. No one is looking at you. It's not because you failed. It's not because you aren't loved in a technical sense. It's because somewhere along the way, you became the background noise of the family. You became the furniture, reliable, present, but ultimately unobserved. That moment plants a seed, a quiet, persistent thought. Maybe I'm just less important. This is the internal world of the undervalued sibling. If this narrative feels like a mirror, it isn't because you are being sensitive or dramatic. It's because your nervous system, in its brilliance and its desperation, learned a survival strategy very early on that dictated how you see your worth, your relationships, and your right to exist in the world. Undervaluation rarely starts with an act of cruelty. In most families, it begins with the unconscious distribution of roles. Families are like ecosystems. They seek balance. To maintain that balance, children are often slotted into types to make the parent's job easier. One child becomes the athlete. Another is the rebel who demands all the disciplinary energy. Another is the gifted one. And then there is you. You became the easy one, the one who will be fine. Parents rarely sit down and decide to overlook a child. Usually, attention follows the loudest fire. Praise follows the most obvious achievement. But for the undervalued sibling, attention is replaced by assumptions. The assumption that you don't need help with your homework because you always get B's or A's anyway. The assumption that you don't need emotional check-ins because you never act out. The assumption that your strength is a natural resource rather than a choice you were forced to make. But the human brain is not fueled by assumptions, it is fueled by recognition. When a child is consistently met with assumed stability, the brain begins to perform a dangerous bit of math. It decides that if it isn't causing a problem, it isn't being seen. And if it isn't being seen, it must not truly matter. Children are meaning-making machines. A child cannot look at an overwhelmed parent and think, my mother is struggling with her own executive dysfunction and internalizing the stress of the economy. Instead, the child thinks, if I were more interesting, she would look at me. If I were more special, they would listen. This belief doesn't stay in the nursery. It matures. It puts on a suit and follows you into your career. It follows you into your bed at night. It disguises itself as independence, but it is actually a deeply rooted fear of being a burden. On the outside, the undervalued sibling is often the dream adult. You are likely capable, punctual, and rarely cause conflict. People describe you as low maintenance or easygoing. In professional settings, you are the one who gets the work done without needing a pat on the back. But inside, there is a constant, grueling negotiation happening. Every time you have a need, a tiny internal voice asks, is this worth the space it will take up? You have learned to minimize yourself, not because you lack desires, but because you learned at age 7 or 12 that expressing a need didn't result in a change in the environment. The brain is efficient. If asking yields nothing, the brain stops asking. It adapts. Research in developmental psychology, particularly in attachment theory, shows that children who receive inconsistent emotional validation often develop a fawn response or a hyperfixation on self-monitoring. You become an expert at reading the room. Before you even say hello, you have scanned the faces of everyone in the house. You know the exact temperature of your partner's mood. You know when your boss is frustrated before they do. This isn't empathy by choice. It's empathy by survival. You learned to become what the room needed you to be so that you could remain safe in your invisibility. You became a chameleon, blending into the wallpaper, believing that your only value lies in your utility. You feel worthy when you are fixing things, when you are helping, or when you are being the strong one for someone else's crisis. But the moment you are just you, without a task, without a role, you feel a profound sense of unease. You feel like an imposter. One of the most isolating aspects of being the undervalued sibling is that nothing happened. When we talk about childhood wounds, we often look for the big things, the shouting, the physical marks, the overt abandonment. But for the undervalued sibling, the wound is an absence. It is the things that didn't happen, the questions that weren't asked, the birthdays that felt like an afterthought, the achievements that were met with a "that's nice, dear," before the conversation shifted back to the troubled sibling. Absence is significantly harder to grieve than pain. Pain validates itself. If someone hits you, you have a bruise to point to. If someone yells at you, you have a memory of the noise. But how do you point to a void? How do you grieve the conversations that never took place? This leads to a lifelong habit of self-invalidation. You tell yourself, other people had it worse. You dismiss your own loneliness because it wasn't dramatic enough to justify the ache in your chest. You become your own harshest gaslighter, convincing yourself that you are being sensitive or ungrateful. In adulthood, this dynamic often manifests as emotional outsourcing. Because you learned how to manage your own emotions in a vacuum, you became incredibly good at holding space for everyone else. You are the friend everyone calls when their life is falling apart. You are the partner who listens for 3 hours to a rant about work. You are the container for other people's chaos. People trust you, they rely on you, they feel safe with you. But there is a bitter irony here. People love you for your reliability, but they rarely know your inner world. Music. Have you ever noticed that after a long conversation where you've helped someone through a crisis, they never ask, "And how are you doing?" And even if they did, would you even know how to answer? For the undervalued sibling, "I'm fine" is not just a phrase, it's a reflex, it's a shield. You've been fine for so long that the truth, that you are tired, that you are lonely, that you want to be the one who is taken care of for once, feels dangerous to speak out loud. This is what psychologists call emotional invisibility. It doesn't create a chaotic life, it creates a small life. You grow up believing that being low impact is a virtue. You think that needing less makes you easier to love. But early independence isn't maturity, it's an adaptation to neglect. A child who stops asking for a hug isn't over it. They've just decided that the rejection of the ask hurts more than the hunger for the touch. For many, the response to being undervalued isn't to give up, it's to overperform. You might have become a high achiever, a perfectionist, or a workaholic. Subconsciously, you are still trying to win that moment in the living room. You think, if I get one more degree, if I make more money, if I am the most helpful person in the office, surely then the spotlight will land on me. But here is the tragedy of the undervalued sibling. Even when you succeed, it feels hollow. Achievement doesn't land because what you were actually seeking wasn't applause, it was attunement. You wanted someone to see the effort, not just the result. You wanted someone to notice the person behind the prize. Because your sense of worth was never stabilized in childhood, it remains situational. You are only as good as your last accomplishment. This is the root of imposter syndrome. You don't feel like a fraud because you lack skill. You feel like a fraud because you don't believe yourself has any inherent value outside of what you can do for others. There usually comes a point in adulthood, often in our 30s or 40s, where the system breaks. You hit a wall of burnout. You realize that you have spent your entire life being the easy one, the reliable one, the stable one, and yet you feel more invisible than ever. This is the reckoning. It's the moment you realize that being easy to deal with has come at the cost of your own soul. You feel a quiet, heavy grief for the version of you that never got to be loud. The version of you that never got to be messy or difficult or needy. You might feel a sudden sharp anger. Why was it always your job to understand? Why were you the one who had to be mature while everyone else got to have feelings? This anger is actually a sign of healing. It is your soul finally protesting the unfairness of the contract you were forced to sign as a child. It is the realization that families are emotional ecosystems that often reward the loudest, most chaotic members, while the deep, quiet ones are left to water themselves. Healing for the undervalued sibling does not require you to go back and scream at your parents, though setting boundaries is often necessary. Healing starts with permission to take up space. It starts with the radical act of saying, "I have a preference," or "I am not okay with this." It's about realizing that your needs are not inconveniences, they are the fundamental requirements of being human. Permission to be difficult. For someone who has been easy their whole life, being difficult just means having a boundary. It means saying no to a favor when you're tired. It means letting someone else handle their own crisis for once. Permission to be seen. Imperfectly. You have likely spent your life presenting a composed version of yourself. True connection requires exposure. It means letting people see you when you don't have the answers. You must understand this. You were not invisible because you lacked value. You were invisible because the people around you lacked the capacity to see depth. Attention is not a reward for worth. It is a reflection of the observer's focus. The quiet strength you developed, that empathy, that ability to see the world in high-definition nuance, those are beautiful qualities, but they should be your gifts to the world, not your ransom for love. As you begin to look at your own life with the same care you've always given to others, something shifts. It's not a loud explosion of self-esteem, it's a quiet settling. You stop waiting for the spotlight to hit you. You realize that you can turn on your own light. You stop shrinking when you walk into a room. You stop assuming that your feelings are optional. The sibling who grew up undervalued often carries a rare kind of wisdom. You have depth without the need for ego. You have strength that doesn't need to shout. You understand the quiet parts of life that everyone else misses. When you finally direct that understanding inward, when you become the witness to your own life, you are finally coming home. You are no longer the background noise, you are the melody, and you always were. If this story is your story, know that the easy child is allowed to be a complex adult. You are allowed to be heard, you are allowed to be held, and most importantly, you are allowed to be the most important person in your own life.